Friends, would you please join with me in the spirit of prayer? Gracious God, may the meditations of all our minds, the thoughts roaming around our hearts, and the very stirring of our spirits this morning be grounded and guided by you as the words of the parable settle and sink in. Not only here and now, but then and there, every moment this week. May your presence, your wisdom guide us. In the name of the one who is the lamp and light to the world, Jesus the Christ, we pray. Amen. So I think we can all agree on one thing. The gospel writer Matthew has some serious issues with weddings. Remember last week, it was some poor guy getting tossed, thrown out on his ear for committing a fashion faux pas at the wedding banquet. Fashion faux pas, I can only assume, was wearing stripes and polka dots together. And now this morning, we have 5 foolish bridesmaids in an oil crisis worse than the gas lines of the 1970s. And I don't know exactly why Matthew has such problems with weddings. I mean, maybe he got booted off of a first century version of The Bachelorette. Or maybe he was left at the altar, jilted by the love of his life. But it seems to me that Matthew is to weddings what the Grinch and Scrooge are to Christmas. And maybe the second thing we can all agree on this morning is that once again, just like the other parables we've heard during Lent, this one parable this morning raises more questions than it certainly provides answers for us. I mean, first and most importantly, where's the bride? In my experience, weddings work best when 2 people are present. Second, what's the deal with the groom showing up at midnight? I mean, I've heard of night owls, but this is a bit ridiculous. And third, and probably most troubling, where exactly did the bridesmaids go to buy oil at midnight? I mean, there was no Walmart that was open where they could pick up a couple quarts of Valvoline, a few Slim Jims, and a Mountain Dew to help keep them awake. As one scholar I read in preparing for the sermon said, and I quote, "This parable seems a bit unrealistic and contrived." Yup. But to be clear here, Jesus isn't the first one to bring wisdom and foolishness together in a story. That distinction actually belongs to the book of Proverbs. In that book of wisdom and folly are constantly hovering and hanging around together. As a matter of fact, in Proverbs 9, wisdom, God's wisdom, which goes by the female name Sophia and foolishness are crying and calling out to the people. Sophia, God's wisdom, and foolishness are beckoning people to come to a banquet that each of them have prepared separately. Now, wisdom, Sophia's banquet, is nourishing and nurturing. It has delicious food on it like blueberries and quinoa and beets, because beets are a thing again. And foolishness? The feast that foolishness has set for us is probably those Slim Jims from Walmart along with a couple of Little Debbie snack cakes. Wisdom and foolishness calling out to us. Wisdom and foolishness surrounding us, hovering there in the air. Wisdom and foolishness. Maybe that's more true today in the world that we live in than when the book of Proverbs was first penned. Consider it this way. As modern day people, every single one of us experiences 100,000 words every day. 100,000 words every single day you and I will read or hear or encounter. It's 34 gigabytes of information trying to get into your brain. Now consider that over a week. Over 700,000 words just from last Sunday. And the deeper question is, which of those words actually stuck or stayed with you? Which of the over 700,000 words you've encountered over the last week actually were meaningful and made a difference to you? Wisdom, foolishness, all around us, clamoring, calling out for our attention. And to be clear, this isn't the only time that Jesus ever talks about wisdom and foolishness. They made a guest appearance earlier on in Matthew's gospel. You might remember the story. You learned it in Vacation Bible School about a wise man who built his house upon a rock, while the foolish one built his house on the sand. And as the story was sung to me and taught to me in those Vacation Bible School days, the rain came down and the waves came up and the house on the sand went splat, while the one on the rock stood stable and sturdy, enduring the weather. Wisdom and foolishness all around us. But I think part of what Jesus is inviting us into is that it's not just out there. It's just not in the air we breathe or the waters we swim in. Foolishness and wisdom swim and stir inside me. I'm both the wise and the foolish bridesmaid all at once. So the parable begins with the foolish and the wise together in some room, ready. The anticipation, excitement of the wedding is about to begin at some point. But the groom is delayed. And with each second that tick-tocks past, the bridesmaids become a bit dreary and drowsy. Now, Jesus doesn't tell us why the groom was delayed. And so scholars love to maybe try to fill in the blank here. Some suggest that perhaps the reason the groom was delayed is that the addition he would have been building onto his father's house was delayed. It wasn't ready yet, so the wedding couldn't begin. In other words, the contractor didn't show up. Something everyone here can relate to. Or maybe the groom was delayed, other scholars say, because he had to renegotiate the dowry. Because nothing says, I love you more than saying, I'm going to need another lamb before I marry your daughter. Or maybe the groom just got cold feet, was reconsidering the wedding. But for whatever reason, the bridesmaids wait, and the oil decreases. And the flame begins to flicker and fade as they fall fast asleep. And I want you to hold that. And I want you to also lay it alongside, because what Jesus may be doing here is a foreshadowing of the disciples who, after the Last Supper, when they go out to the garden to pray, the disciples fall asleep while Jesus is praying for the cup to pass by him. Eventually, the groom is in his tux. He's ready to go. He arrives, and the cry goes out that the wedding is about to start. And so the bridesmaids, the wise and the foolish, wake up, and they try to tend their lamps, to trim them, to keep them burning. but the 5 foolish ones haven't brought enough oil. That raises a question for me in this odd and out there parable. I mean, do I really believe that the wise ones don't have just a smidgen they could spare so that everybody could have a little oil to light the way? Or maybe the wise ones, like me, sometimes in the midst of fear or excitement, I cling to the resources that are mine rather than sharing. On the other hand, it seems as though the foolish bridesmaids have the financial resources to go buy the oil. There's nothing about having the wise ones lend them money. They certainly had the time to fall asleep, so they had the time to go get the oil as the groom was delayed. As I step back and start to consider the pieces of these parables that Jesus is telling in Matthew and trying to put them together, there's some tension. There's some tension I feel. Just a few weeks ago, remember we had a landowner of a vineyard who paid his workers, regardless of whether they worked an hour or they labored under the hot sun all day. The landowner paid them all equally. Generosity. And now today there seems to be something about responsibility. So which is it? Are we to be generous to everyone at all times? Or is there some kind of responsibility and accountability? And Matthew lays these side by side and seems to say, yes. Not either or, both and. Both generosity and responsibility out on the wedding dance floor with each other. And then the parable comes to an abrupt end. The door is slammed and locked shut for the foolish bridesmaids, and I wince and I cringe. Because I know every single person here, you carry with you experiences and encounters where you feel like the door has been slammed shut on you. Maybe it was a promotion that you worked so hard to get and yet were denied. Maybe it was a family member who turned his or her back on you in your time of need. Maybe it was a friend who said something that cut deeper than a knife ever could. And make no mistake about it, there is no amount of frosting I can put on the end of the parable to make it palatable. And yes, I know it's true. I know it's true that God moves both in moments of great love and also great loss. But in those times of grief, in those times of struggle, in those times when it feels foolish, like the door's been shut in our face, it hurts. You know, maybe the star of this story isn't the mysterious missing bridesmaid, isn't the groom who was delayed, isn't even the bridesmaids wise or foolish. Maybe the star of the story is actually the lamp, the light. Do you know what material lamps in Jesus' day were most commonly made of? This is the congregation participation part of the sermon. Make sure you haven't fallen asleep. What were lamps usually made of in Jesus' day? Clay. Clay, exactly right. Earth, dirt, dust. Remember where we started our Lenten journey on Ash Wednesday? You came forward, had ashes placed on your forehead, and we said to you, from dust you are, to dust you shall return. Not in a way to discourage you, but in a way to connect you with the soil beneath your feet and the stardust above your head, that we are all part, earth and us together, are all woven tightly with one another. Or take that another step. The theologian N.T. Wright says that in a few moments when we sing the Lord's Prayer and we get to that part about thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, Wright says that we're not just praying for God's will to be done out there in the world. We're praying for God's will to be done in here, in this earthen vessel, in this body made up of dirt and air and life all around us. And you know when my lamp starts to burn lowest? You know when I start to run out of oil the most? It's those moments I say to God, that's okay, I got it. You just sit back. The moment my lamp runs low or an empty of oil are those times I pray for God's will here in church on Sunday, but I seek my will on Monday. Those moments my oil runs out and I feel foolish, bumble and stumble around are those times that I race and run so much because I think it's all up to me. Choir's invited us to trim our lamps, to keep them burning, but we don't do that alone. God is with us. God's wisdom is the one who helps us to trim our lamps, to keep them burning. And there is no just one way to trim your lamp. There's no one way you can keep your oil on full. It's as very diverse and different as there are people here. For some of you, the way you keep your lamp trimmed and burning, keep open to God's presence, is by coming to the Nehemiah Action or baking a cake for the community meal or participating in service. For still others, you keep your lamp trimmed and burning. Notice God's presence at Bible studies or book conversations or the feast classes we've been enjoying on Thursdays. For still others, it's listening to lectures or seeing art or making art or going out in this beautiful creation outside, feeling the sun on your face and hearing the birds sing to you. To trim your lamps and keep them burning. That's not an individual, isolated experience. It's an invitation to let God's wisdom be what fills you, strengthens you, and sustains you. Let the melody of God's voice sing out to you in many ways this week. So much so that your life might sing out another wonderful song from my vacation Bible school days. That song that goes, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." May that be our theme song this week. Amen.